Now on to session 3, Asia Pacific leaping forward through genomics and pharmacogenomics, personalized healthcare, precision oncology, precision diabetes. This session will be moderated by Kawaldip Sehmi, CEO. Joining the session is Dr. Saumya Shekhar Jamuar, head of the SingHealth Duke-NUS Genomics Medicine Center, and Dr. Edralin, DPCOM and General Manager of Roche. You can find their full biographies on the official Congress website. Please submit your questions in the Q&A tab. If you're joining us for the first time, the Q&A tab is on the extreme right side of the auditorium screen. You'll see the label Ask Question. You can simply click on the icon. It's above the group chat icon. I now invite Kawaldip Sehmi to the floor. Over to you, Kawaldip.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kara. It's a pleasure talking to you. I've got with me two very good speakers, and it's a pleasure to have Dr. Saumya and Dr. Diana with me. One of the things that we all look forward to on this session is to ensure that we have got what we all need in our next phases of our health systems. I'm reminded of the simple fact that 50 years ago, in 1955 or thereabouts, it took about almost 60 years for knowledge to double every time. It was so slow. Then when it came to the 1980s, we found that knowledge could double every 10 years. And now we are at a stage where we're now finding that knowledge doubles every few months, in fact, 72 days. With this much knowledge developing, there is that critical opportunity now available for us to refresh our health systems. For the past 70 years, the WHO has relied on small molecule and has relied on what we call analog healthcare to give us one-size-fits-all population health kind of measures. For the next 75 years of WHO's era, starting next year, will have to be determined by genomic medicine, digital healthcare, and it will move away from generalized one-size-fit healthcare to personalized healthcare. So I have the pleasure now asking Dr. Saumya to give us overall landscape. What is the healthcare ecosystem in this new approach? Where does everything fit in? And then I'll ask Dr. Diana to say, what are we doing about encouraging patient education and encouraging patients to undertake knowledge and enabling them to advocate for personalized healthcare, precision medicine, and precision oncology. Over to you, Dr. Saumya. Thank you.
Thanks, Kawaldip, for the introduction, and thanks to the organizers of the Third Asia Pacific Patients Congress for this opportunity for me to present and participate in this panel discussion. And I think to answer Kawaldip's question of what this era would look like, I mean, the word that comes to mind is exciting, because this is a transformational change that's happening in healthcare. And what I want to do in the next 8 or 9 minutes or so is to just give a backdrop of what that driver of change is. So I'll just show a couple of slides on this aspect, and then look forward to having a discussion during the Q&A session. Next slide, please. So just as a background, I'm a clinician. I see patients with genetic disorders, and I head the SingHealth Duke-NUS Genomic Medicine Center, where we are looking at integrating genomics into routine healthcare across the SingHealth campus, which has 9 tertiary care institutes. And next slide, please. Just wanted to start off with just declare my conflicts of interest. Work at KK Hospital, where we do offer genetic service, and I'm a co-founder of Global Gene Corp, which is a genomic data platform company. Next slide, please. And this slide is what excites me the most, because this is the impact that genomics has on an individual's health. And while some of us would say, oh, it's only 30%, I think it is significant, because it is 30% of an individual's health is determined by their genome. A big 40% is behavioral patterns, things like smoking, alcohol, other recreational activities. 20% is social and environmental exposure, and 10%, which is very relevant in our setting, is access to healthcare. But for the purpose of this talk, I'll just focus on the 30%, which is the genomics. What we know about genomics is that it affects the rare diseases. And rare diseases are rare because they affect less than 1 in 2,000 individuals. Individually, yes, they are rare, but cumulatively, they affect more than 2% of all live borns. So every pregnancy, there's a 2% risk of having a baby with a genetic problem, even in the absence of a family history. When we move it up to adults, about 5 to 10% of all cancers are because the individual has a genetic predisposition to developing a cancer. And what's more important is there's a chance of passing it down to the next generation. And the last aspect, which is sort of the low-hanging fruit, is pharmacogenomics, which is how does an individual respond to a medication? And what we are learning is that more than 99% of us actually carry a pharmacogenomic variant, which means that almost all of us may have some genetic change that may alter how our body reacts to a medication. All this leads to a significant social, emotional, and economic burden, not only to the individual, but the family and the healthcare system. Next slide, please. So what's driving this? And this graph kind of explains that concept. It took 13 years, $2.7 billion, to sequence the first human genome in 2001. In 2021, I can sequence a genome for $1,000 in under 1 week. So that's the scale at which things have progressed in the last 2 decades. Next slide, please. And as we understand more of the genetics, I wanted to introduce the concept of what do we mean by genetic changes, right? So all of us have 20,000 genes. Imagine genes are like instruction manuals. They tell the body how to function. We have 20,000 such instruction manuals, and we have a pair of every instruction manual. One set comes from mom, one set comes from dad. These instruction manuals are packaged into what we call chromosomes. And imagine a chromosome is a book. So we have 23 pairs of books. One set comes from mom, one set comes from dad. And the changes can happen at 2 levels. One is a copy number change. That means we have a missing book, an extra book, we have a missing page or an extra page. These changes are called copy number variants. Or, as some of you may know, the genetic textbook is written in a specific code of 4 letters, A, G, C, T. And if it's spelled incorrectly, what we call a sequencing change, then that also can lead to disease. So the 2 types of genetic changes could be a copy number change, where there's a missing or extra bit of DNA, or it could be a spelling change or a sequencing variant. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we have 20,000 genes in each genome. And when we look at an individual's genome, all of us are different, although 99.9% of our DNA is the same. And that 0.1% accounts for 4 million variants across the genome. Most of these variants are what we call benign variants, which means that they don't affect our health in any way. These are just random, distributed across the genome. But occasionally they affect a critical part of that instruction manual and lead to a disease. And so as part of that work, what we and the world is doing is as we're sequencing more and more individuals, we're looking at a subset of genes that cause adult onset disease that is what we call actionable, where if you identify something, you can take an action to prevent or mitigate the effect of that genetic variant. So the American College of Medical Genetics has a secondary findings. It was 59, and more recently it's gone up to 73. And Center of Disease and Control has a tier 1 gene, which has 11 genes in it. What's intriguing is that about 1 to 2% of us healthy individuals have clinically significant variants in these genes, and these are referred to as incidental or secondary findings. We do not know about this because we may not have a family history, or we may not have been tested as yet. And this is illustrated in an example. Next slide, please. So as part of our research, we recruit healthy participants. These are individuals who consider themselves healthy. They're not on medication. They haven't been given a diagnosis yet. And so we had a 26-year-old male who was recruited. We did whole genome sequencing, identified millions of variants. But within those variants, we actually identified 2 variants in this gene called ATP7B. This gene is an important gene which is related to how our body processes copper. And if this gene is not working, it leads to copper being accumulated in the body. It leads to liver damage as well as damage to the brain, and can present with symptoms related to dysfunction of these 2 organs. This individual, on the other hand, was relatively healthy. We met up with the patient, we counseled the individual, and on a more detailed history taking, he mentioned that he had a history of anxiety and depression since 16 years old, which he didn't really think too much of, but anxiety and depression are one of the symptoms of this disease, and the disease called Wilson disease. So now this healthy individual who had these mild symptoms of anxiety and depression now has a genetic diagnosis. The more important aspect of this is a treatable disease. Next slide, please. And so this individual was offered copper chelation therapy, a treatment to bind the extra copper in his body because his body can't do it to manage his symptoms. Next slide, please. This nicely segues into the next topic of pharmacogenomics, which is in a way a starting point for genomics in personalized healthcare. As mentioned, more than 99% of us carry a genetic variant that affects a response to medication. And as Kawaldip said, in the past, management used to be analog, one size fits all. Patient population comes in, we say, this is the drug that works for you, that works for this condition, so we'll treat you with that drug. The drug may be effective in 20% of the target population, but a waste in 80%. In about another 20%, it will actually lead to side effects. So a tailored approach, which is based on pharmacogenomics, allows stratification of these patients. So these patients can be grouped and given the appropriate treatment. So the right patient gets the right drug at the right dose at the right time. And this is something that is possible now. There's this app that allows point of care pharmacogenomic result interpretation for individuals that gives them information regarding suitability of the drug at the point of care when the physician is prescribing this treatment. Next slide, please. And then just finishing up with this report that was published 2 years back in the New England Journal. This girl on the left pictured with her mom, her name is Neela, and she had a very severe condition where she had refractory seizures because she has a genetic disease called Batten's disease. Her diagnosis was made in November 2016. And in 2018, she was given the first dose of the medication named after her called Milasan, with the dosing, her symptoms improved. Unfortunately, she did not, her condition was such that it progressed and she recently passed away. But this was the first proof of principle that if we know your genetic diagnosis, we can actually give a medication that's personalized to that individual. And next slide, please. And this is where this was next slide. And this was a commentary in Science just last week, which talked about personalized RNA drugs that may maybe soon be available. So with that, next slide. Thank you for listening and look forward to the discussion. Over to you, Kawaldip.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saumya. I think you've really laid the landscape out there for us. And then I think one of the things that was very good was that Moore's law. And I think I picked it up quickly because this is what happened when we had the introduction of your simple Apple Macs way back. They were very expensive, inaccessible. And basically, we never envisaged, and they were used for simple things like typing letters and Excel sheets. But how they've developed over time is that we all have one in our pocket now. It's cheap, it's easy accessible, we have that. Similarly, I think with Moore's law, everything that genomic gene therapies, etc., the price will drop and it will be easily accessible, all the support system. And now I will ask Dr. Diana Edralin to tell us what is happening at the cutting edge. Roche, as you know, has been leading through this whole, during the pandemic. As you know, it came out with the first test. It was all based on genomics. It developed the test rapidly, and all the tests and what I call trace were coming from Roche. Then the Roche therapies are coming in, and Roche is now really pumping hard at the back, trying to personalize healthcare. They really understand. I think they're one of those innovative companies that really understood what it means. And one of the greatest things that I've had the privilege of sitting on board and working with was with a group of patients called the International Experience Exchange Patients. And we are not talking about humanizing healthcare using digital and genomic medicine. You know, it's inconceivable. It's counterintuitive to think that technology will come and allow us to humanize healthcare. All the issues of decision-making that were occupying our time could be freed up so that we could have personal contact and therefore humanize how we approach. So over to you, Dr. Diana, to share with us how it's going forward and what's happening at the cutting edge, how you're reforming and really disrupting the whole healthcare landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kawaldip. I appreciate the level of energy and excitement that you're giving in this discussion. And thank you also to the organizers of this event. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be part of the third Asia Pacific Patient Congress and be able to share with you some insights and perspectives on how we can co-create and take full ownership of personalizing our healthcare approach. Next slide, please. These are my disclosures. I am the General Manager of Roche Philippines. Next slide, please. Let's start off the conversation with the why. So why is it important to deliver healthcare in a different way? As Kawaldip mentioned, why is it important to revolutionize the way we think, the way we approach healthcare? And why is it even more relevant to talk about an individualized approach in healthcare now more than ever? To reflect on the answers to these questions, over to the next slide, let me take you to some blue skies thinking where there are endless possibilities and no barriers to hold us down. So imagine yourself being at the center of the healthcare system and being most powered member of the healthcare team. Imagine yourself being part of the decision making in every step of the way, and that the healthcare delivery for each step is seamless, efficient, and user friendly. If you can see all the barriers down there, all of these are eliminated in that blue skies thinking. Finally, imagine a healthcare system that has every component of that system contributing directly to a single goal, which is to deliver the outcomes that are most important to you. Over to the next slide. Are you getting excited? These possibilities are increasingly becoming a reality at this pivotal moment in medical history, where we are witnessing the unprecedented convergence of science and advanced technology, as Kawaldip alluded to, revolutionizing patient care. This convergence is actually offering new and different ways to patients in tracking their own health, while giving more real-world insights into their journey and how their needs are being addressed also in real time. With advances in technology, patients are also gaining more knowledge at a very fast pace, which also elevates their expectations for innovation from which they can benefit the most. As a result of reshaping the healthcare system, there are also new opportunities for public and private partnership models to form and accelerate this new approach in patient care. Even the regulatory environment is also adapting to foster innovation and accommodate these novel methodologies, therefore enabling faster access that we never thought was possible before. These changes are creating also new opportunities to improve decision making and implement value based, outcome driven healthcare. This means that we are to experience results from treatment that patients care about the most. And it also means that we are aiming to make healthcare proactive instead of being reactive or taking an as only needed basis approach. Over to the next slide. Further to this growth in knowledge in science and technology, the digital revolution in healthcare now allows us new ways to both collect high quality data from each patient and connect this data to larger pools of other patients across the world or across different regions. This also enables us to arrive at a deeper understanding of the disease biology and its expression in individual patients. For example, the molecular information generated from the next generation sequencing that was shared earlier, the data from your wearable devices, and even the mobile apps, as Kawaldip shared, that allow you to track your progress in relation to the environment you are in. The innovative imaging techniques, and even the novel clinical trials, all these are transforming the future of care. Going forward, our ability to capture and understand unprecedented amounts of data from multiple sources will allow for a more in-depth view of each patient over time, thus putting the promise of truly personalized healthcare within reach. We at Roche, over to the next slide, are then responding to this call, this need to redesign and rethink the way we care, the way care should be delivered. We are moving towards a more dynamic approach than a traditional linear one, the one that you can see over to the left side of the slide, putting patient at the center of optimizing the treatment plan. Factors such as demographics, lifestyle, unique genomics, as also shared earlier, along with the personal needs, are the main considerations in the development. We are taking a whole new level. We're taking to a whole new level where healthcare plans and decisions are made around the person rather than the condition or just the disease itself. Over to the next slide. Moving into this new direction in improving care for each patient takes a community to be realized. Solving the biggest challenges requires co-creation, collaboration, and partnerships. We cannot work in silos. Different stakeholders must actually talk to each other and come together to discuss and agree on healthcare solutions that are specifically designed to meet the needs of each individual patient and not a one-size-fits-all approach. How does then this look like? How can we get personalized healthcare as an outcome of that different approach that we are taking on? Over to the next slide. As we then put the patient at the center, next slide, please, at the center and not the disease, it entails reshaping or redesigning the care plan around your needs, your biology, your genomics, the risk factors, the lifestyle that may impact your treatment response, as also shared earlier. This can be made possible, of course, with early detection and targeted treatment, leveraging a new technology to better understand and manage your condition. And the ability to access these resources and healthcare solutions all in a sustainable manner. Over to the next slide. What does personalized healthcare then mean to us? How does this impact all of us? It means that we are actually treating the person, not the condition, as I've said earlier, and it goes beyond the medicine and has the potential to change the entire healthcare system. It also means give people more choices and more control. It's about getting people affected by a condition more involved in the health care that they receive and to encourage more independence rather than passivity. It also means involving people in making decisions about their healthcare, focusing on achieving outcomes, again, that are most important to them. Ultimately, the goal of personalized healthcare is to take into account everyone's unique needs and tailor healthcare to these needs in order to improve care and patient outcomes. Over to the next slide. One example I'd like to share with you is on comprehensive genomic profiling, or CGP. Today, we now have the opportunity to look deeper into the tumor biology or makeup of individual patients through the next generation sequencing, or NGS. This allows us to detect the specific DNA alterations, for example, in a cancer patient, that promotes the tumor growth, which goes out of control. With the NGS technology, we're able to distinguish the specific tumor types of a single disease. Take lung cancer, for example. Previously, it's being treated in a based on the standard of care, but not realizing that there are actually a lot of variations right now, more than 10 variations at least for lung cancer. So from an individual perspective, for instance, in a newly diagnosed patient with lung cancer, we now have the opportunity to test to an amazing amount of depth and thoroughness the genetic mutations in just one single test, and not having to do 5 or 10 biomarker tests to be able to find what exactly the patient is experiencing. What this means is that patients and physicians can now have, from the early part of the patient journey, the information that will direct their therapy targeting the specific tumor type. As I mentioned earlier, previously this was done in increments or during progression of the disease based on the only available clinical guidance. Having this technology and information of starting optimal therapy earlier in the journey becomes now a reality. It also helps us achieve our goal of delivering the right medicine to the right patient at the right time. The meaningful data that we gain from this also feeds into the other aspects of healthcare, such as research, governance, and even reimbursement. At the same time, we are able to have more directed societal expenses and efforts on both healthcare and research that are geared towards improving outcomes for all and ultimately a more humane healthcare system. Over to the next slide. This would not actually have been possible in the last 5 or 50 years ago, as Kawaldip has mentioned. And today, I'm so delighted to share with you that we have made significant progress here in Asia Pacific, where countries such as Australia, Taiwan, and Singapore have successfully led the way in facilitating access to comprehensive genomic profiling and leveraging the data insights to deepen our understanding of the disease and help to improve outcomes. This was made possible, very importantly, through a community approach again, wherein key stakeholders really came together to discuss and commit to actually make it happen. Over to the next slide. Another example that I have for you is the Philippines. As a healthcare system, the Philippines is primarily self-pay market. But recent years, the national government's efforts are shifting towards more equitable access, improved service delivery, health financing, and reducing system inefficiencies. In the context of personalized healthcare, the collaborative approach were very evident. First, was establishing cancer as a national health priority. This was done through conversations with relevant stakeholders, societal movers, government agencies, driven by the patient groups themselves. This led to the development and completion also of the PESO study, which spelled out the economic burden of cancer as, as an objective in a scientific way um, to guide policymakers to help address this huge burden to the nation. A significant development also in the past few years included the enactment of the National Cancer Control Act, the first in the history of the Philippines that laid down the framework and the possibility for better access for Filipino cancer patients and their families. Second was the relentless efforts to make comprehensive genomic profiling available and usable for patients. It entailed a robust level of awareness and educational campaign for both patients and healthcare professionals alongside partnering with key laboratory networks to provide a widespread geographic access. Philippines is an archipelago, so access sometimes also becomes a bit tricky. So the end-to-end support was done in order to maximize value of our healthcare professionals and our patients. And despite having many limitations, the appreciation of the role and the value of CGP in early detection and individualized treatment has grown significantly in the country, with many patients benefiting from this breakthrough technology. Looking into the future, Roche Philippines is forging more partnerships towards advancing personalized healthcare, whether through registry or IT system development. These partnerships are actually happening and still progressing in collaboration with the different medical or academic societies, patient groups, and continuing meaningful conversations with the various stakeholders, all working towards improving access for patients in both diagnostics and therapeutics. Over to the next slide. In all the examples that I've shared with you, critical to the success of redesigning healthcare is the patient and the collaboration with patient groups. As mentioned also earlier by Kawaldip, we at Roche developed a global platform called the International Experience Exchange with Patients Organizations, or IAPO, specifically made for the engagement with the patient community, to co-create and collaborate, and to be strong and impactful partners with an equal voice in the dialogue to transform the future of the healthcare ecosystems together. This platform offers a wide range of resources and tools co-created with patient advocates who are the experts and the most knowledgeable on how we redefine and reshape how care should be delivered. Over to the next slide. The IAPO platform is also home to the PHC, or the Personalized Healthcare Hub, where there are toolkits that are made with and in partnership with the patient community. It is actually one of the first repositories that have been made where you can find a growing collection of educational materials, guidance, and best practice examples across the world that will support health advocates and the patient community to co-create personalized health solutions that are available for everyone. I encourage all of you to actually visit IAPO and the PHC Hub sites to learn more about the topics that we discussed today and be able to use the materials too. Over to the last slide. I would then like to end this conversation with you by reinforcing our commitment. We at Roche are your partners, and we can be the catalysts for exponential change that advances scientific discovery and improves healthcare for all people in Asia Pacific. We continue to be committed in working collaboratively with all stakeholders in healthcare, including the governing and regulatory bodies, to make personalized healthcare a reality. Thank you. Over to you, Kawaldip.
Thank you very much, Diana. I think it's such a pleasure listening to that, and I was very passionate and driven, and I like the idea of its endless possibilities and endless skies, and no barriers for us in this. We can make we can think of it, and I'm so happy that the Duke-NUS team is part of this. Also on the IAPO, as you mentioned, the results. One of the things I must tell everybody was that the number of patients who were engaged with it, and there were people from right up to from Peru, Mexico, Brazil on the left, and then on to right as far as Japan, Singapore, obviously. And you can see the Duke-NUS team was core to that. I mean, Nikki, you have other groups that were part of that. And we developed a very good basis for this. And something that came up, and I've been now asked this question that I need to pose to one or both of you, in fact. Do you think patient engagement in genomics and development of genomic medicines and precision medicines is critical or not? Or should we go down that direction of small molecule, be anonymous research and RD? To Saumya first, if you could talk about it, Dr. Saumya.
Thanks, Kawaldip. Yeah. And again, that's a great question. And what I would say is that there is a fundamental shift, right, where it tended to be a paternalistic model of healthcare, where a patient would go to a doctor and assume that the doctor knows everything, and then prescribes manage the patient based on what was understood about the disease. Mm. The shift that's happening is that it's no longer about the disease; it's about the individual, the patient, right? And this is where it's a much more active process, right? Each individual has the power to take care of their own health. Obviously, to a certain, we are still learning a lot. We don't know everything, but I think taking the journey together with the patient definitely helps me as a clinician manage them better, because being a partner is much easier than actually taking, than leading them. So I strongly believe that patient participation or individual participation in any of this work is critical to the success moving forward as we move from a one-size-fits-all to a personalized healthcare.
Thank you very much. Same question to you, Diana.
Yeah, I definitely fully agree with Dr. Saumya has shared with us. I think it truly, I think of all the recent studies, I think it was also shared in the previous presentation that it definitely has an impact towards the patient outcomes. And I think, there are two aspects of it, right? Patient engagement is critical on the individual experience that has already been shared and expounded by Dr. Saumya, but also one aspect of it is the societal approach, right? So patient engagement is critical in that aspect on the societal approach, because as I mentioned, in this day and age, with the level of engagement and the data that's available, I think more and more the patients, as I mentioned, you're elevating the level of empowerment in such a way that it becomes more proactive rather than reactive, and that we have the ability to shape and not just be a passive recipient of these decisions that are being made. I think we have to have a seat on that table, and I think it's very important for us to be able to have that equal treatment amongst the different stakeholders and be part of that discussion.
Thank you. I think you almost addressed it. The genomics is leveling, it democratizes society. I think it's because it's so personalized. With small molecules, companies could work on their own, and come up with something. But with genomics, you have to work with the living individuals, and therefore that means you have to include them. That's absolutely brilliant. The next question that I've got, I think, again, will be to both. One of the most pertinent question now they've raised on this. Yesterday, I said quite late, 8 p.m. on this time, in UK time, listening to United Nations General Assembly Committee number 3, we just passed the has forwarded the resolution now for rare diseases and family engagement. So what you have just said was exactly what they were saying, that without the family and patient engagement, we can't go. So they've passed a resolution which amazingly 53 countries supported. It's something that we never seen before. It's only like 1 or 2. And all of those 53 countries have put priorities of genomic medicine down. What do you think, Dr. Saumya, and also looking at Dan, Singapore's approach in putting genomics first? I've seen digital healthcare and then again, Asia Pacific leading on this. Do you think that is how things will go? Is there political will in the region, and how can we help boost that political will? First to you, Dr. Saumya.
Thanks, Kawaldip. Yeah, it was quite exciting. I didn't catch the actual live event, but I did read the news. I participate in this WHO effort in collaborative global network for rare diseases. And as part of that, they've been pushing for this UN resolution as well. So we're very glad to see that. Moving to the efforts, as you may have heard in Singapore, as part of their research RIE 2025, which is the research plan for Singapore, precision medicine was given a key emphasis, so much so that they've actually set up a separate unit called Precision Health Research Singapore, or PRECISE, that is actually looking at the different facets and aspects of how personalized healthcare can be implemented in the Singaporean healthcare system, right? As part of that, what they have done is, as a proof of concept in phase 1, they had recruited about 10,000 healthy participants, some of them who had consented to be recontacted for further information, had access to the healthcare records, and that kind of gave information to say we could actually build it up. So the current phase is looking at scaling up to 100,000 healthy Singaporeans, and then understanding the different disease mechanisms and seeing how we could personalize that healthcare. But at the same time, working with different partners to look at not just the science element of it, but also the clinical implementation, as well as the legal and regulatory frameworks. And the last aspect is patient engagement, and the ethics around it. So all these activities are something that's happening right now in Singapore. So I think from speaking just on that, and I don't have any authority to speak on that as well, but I think there is enough movement within Singapore. And this is something very similar to what's happening in the West, where Genomics England, All of Us Research, Genomics Melbourne, and Australia are kind of leading that way. So I think there is a momentum in that direction, and hopefully we can actually get more and more countries involved as we move forward. Over.
Thank you. Dan, over to you. See what you think.
Yeah, so building on Dr. Saumya's input, I think you asked about specifically on Singapore's readiness and appetite. I think it's also highlighted in the examples that I've shared earlier in terms of the energy and also the commitment of the Singapore government, but also going back to the patients who are actually driving all of these. With a one that I've shared with you about IAPO, right? So there has also been a Singapore experience exchange with a patient organization that was actually held in the cited there, in that you highlighted actually Kawaldip the importance of patients' role in advancing personalized healthcare enabled health systems, and that there was also an inspiration by another speaker, wherein the power of a united patient community can actually work. That can actually work the different possibilities that we have discussed earlier. And I think in terms of the readiness, right? So in that same conversation, it was highlighted that in the importance of a data-driven healthcare and power of patient data, as we mentioned, not only for the individual patients, but also for a specific group of, let's say, genomic lineage. And in partnership with the future proofing of healthcare's personalized health index, Singapore actually ranked first for PhD readiness. And that's why these certain conversations need to continue, need to happen, and actually need to put into action. And I think Singapore has really made significant progress on this end.
Okay, thank you. Now I will touch on the more complex and more controversial point of it. But we're sure we can have, as you know, with any new technology that's introduced, any new health technologies, the first thing that happens is ethics comes into the foreground. We know that for genomic medicines, one of the most controversial and bitter points that we are now talking about is who owns that data and how do we regulate that data. We're okay giving you my telephone number, but then giving my genomic code, the billions of it, who will own it and how can we protect it? What's your feeling? How do we proceed forward? Do we need hard and fast rules, which may kill the whole science? Or do we need to work again in partnership with each other and build a new consensus on how to regulate this field? So same to both parties. Dr. Saumya, to you, to start with you.
Okay. Thanks, Kawaldip. Yeah. No, and this is again a very hot button issue because in the past when we were just looking at it from a research perspective, we could de-identify participants by assigning them keys, right? And there's a participant study ID, and then there's a patient information that's kept separate, and there's a key that matches them. That is fundamentally not possible with genomics, because back in 2013, a group from Whitehead Institute in Boston, Cambridge, US, actually managed to identify individuals based on their publicly shared genomic data, and they matched it with obituary information that was in the press, and they could actually identify who that individual was. So the genomic data is not de-identifiable in that sense. And so this is a conversation that's happening again in Singapore at the highest level, where the question is, how do we protect that information that the individual has sort of consented to give to the research community? And we know that it's important to share that. And it's also happening at the global level. So I'm in the regulatory and ethics work stream of Global Alliance for Genomics and in Global Health. And there are certain rules that have been built, that have been laid out in terms of how this data is handled and how access to that data is granted to different individuals. And one of the key tenets that's come across is accessing the data in silos rather than in entirety helps to protect some of that reverse engineering that people could do. At the same time, again, it's something that it's also causing a shift in how we perceive that true de-identification may never be possible. And the question is, how do we protect that identity, of that individual? So it's an issue that's evolving. There are standards being created, and they will continue to be evolved. But again, and this is where the patient's voice comes in as well, because we talk about healthcare data as very private, confidential, but you've got an individual posting on Facebook, Instagram, saying, "I just went for my scope. This is what it showed," right? and so what we consider, they may not consider that as so concerning. So again, the patient voice becomes important as well, and having their views in becomes important.
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Saumya, you really hit the nail on the head. There's a colleague of mine at MIT, and he did analysis on the same basis. He looked at Facebook posting, and he could actually quite accurately predict the epidemiology of certain diseases in countries by looking at what the patients had written, So you're quite right. Now to Dan, again, Dr. Dan, if you could highlight how is the ethics issue landscape and how can we improve it?
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned, Dr. Saumya already laid down the very important points. What are the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages? And I would just want to highlight the importance, again, of having the ability to shape, right? So not being a passive recipient of all these changes, or at least these advances, but for us to actually take charge, right? So for the patients and the patient communities, having the ability to shape that, what they are comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, but also to be able to learn. Because to your point earlier, if you put so many guardrails, so many barriers, then we will not be able to achieve the outcomes that we're actually hoping for. Because as mentioned earlier, the specific data or information can actually have not just individual benefit, but also have a societal benefit that can shape, the way we shape healthcare, the government regulations, or even reimbursement in itself. So I think at the end of the day, what's important is the intent that comes with it, and how do we safeguard the things that are truly important to the patients, but then how we also balance, again, the societal impact of generating this information for individuals and also as a whole.
Thank you much. And the last question, so we can wrap this up. Such a fascinating, we could have sat here all day. Is a question now. So far, we have dealt with genomic medicine and its approaches and usage, thinking of it in the last, say, 10 years, that it was only about rare issues we are dealing with. But increasingly, when the pandemic hit us, we suddenly find that everybody is talking about genetic engineering, the mRNA differences, adenovirus vehicles in pubs. Yeah, sitting around in pubs. This was a talk we never had. As it becomes societal and more open for access, we are also finding that there are some causes, especially immunodeficiency of diseases, autoimmune diseases, so forth, and even heart disease, which are called the large-scale NCDs, which will benefit from this. What's your opinion on that? Should we now invest or ask government investment to invest in it as if it's beneficial to whole of society rather than rare, meaning that this is health technology assessment should change its model, that this is needs money now, thinking about the future, not the current and time moment. What's your opinion? We saw the Moore's law. So I will start with Diana first. From a company perspective, I think you have invested a lot of money into this technology. How should we go for that reimbursement and other things? Yeah.
Well, you raised a very good point. As we continue to evolve the healthcare and revolutionize the healthcare system, we need to be able to make sure that it's not just only for a specific few, but what is also the larger impact. And I think the data that we have generated, shifting from the cancer and the rare disease that you mentioned, Roche's commitment even in this pandemic has allowed, again, the data and information to quickly develop the various technologies that are being used right now globally, as far as, let's say, the PCR antibody test, the antigen test, and even being able to distinguish which tests are actually for influenza and which are actually ones for COVID. See, so that's the value of truly investing on this technology and the data information that we can actually use. So definitely it's a big yes, but then going to your question, but this data becomes useless if it's not accessible, right? I think there's also that element of ensuring that it is accessible to everyone in a sustainable way, but also the other aspect to it is also ensuring that our regulations or the systems that are in place are allowing for fast access to this technology, right? Because that also becomes a barrier. So while we continue to innovate, there's also some barriers that we experience. Oh, but how about where's your approval for this? Where's your approval for that? Is it approved in all other countries? No, but this is unprecedented times. No one actually prepared for COVID, right? So if you want to have faster access, then the systems in place, especially at the local level, should be agile enough to accommodate the speed at which technology is being developed.
Thank you very much. And we can relate to that immediately at our Global Patients Congress in November 2020, when Thomas Queenie from IFPMA promised us a vaccine ready by December. Nobody believed him. And guess what? They delivered it. So you're right, it's unprecedented. Dr. Saumya, again, to you to finish off on the where we're going, the economic modeling and HDA and all that.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take that from a science perspective, and I think this is where the use of genomics is becoming very exciting, because some of you may be aware, or maybe most of you are aware of this thing called polygenic risk scoring. So in the past, we used to think about genetics as rare diseases, and because rare diseases are rare, most of us didn't bother with it. But what's happened is that our ability to sequence more genomes and analyze them in aggregate with clinical information has allowed us to build models which predicts development of common diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. And this risk scoring is called polygenic risk scores. And that is something that is really the next step in terms of personalized healthcare. And that's already something that's commercially available through some of the companies. The challenge here is that these polygenic risk scores were derived based on a biased data set, and the biased data set is the Western data set. 78% of genomic data in public databases is Northern European. The rest of the world comprises 22%, and China and India are less than 10%, right?
Yes.
And so if we use insights from that data set in Asia Pacific, we may be actually misdiagnosing patients. And so I think first step in this effort towards making this more mainstream is developing that reference genome for the healthy population in the local setting rather than use global data set. And that's why it becomes, the Asia Pacific patients or individuals become critical to the success of that being available.
Thank you very much. I think on that footnote, I think you have given us that steer. Asia Pacific now needs to take charge of it. Our genetic heritage, mine, people like yourself and others, we are very different. And that's what it is, yeah. That there is no good or bad. That's how we are. We have got inherently different things here. We've got genes that genomic, multi-genes which can influence. So we've got to take control of this for ourselves in the region. And I would say urge APAC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and the other ASEAN and other bodies to look at this. And thank you very much, both of you. I think it's been a fantastic discussion, and we will continue this discussion later on. There are many things that we are planning. I will now hand back to Kara to sum us and then proceed on. Kara, back to you, and thank you everybody who's watched and listened in, and just watch this space. More is happening. So we have got next 75 years to look at this. Thank you.